Yo, I'm Asa. My name is Hochgi'i. How's it going? I hope you like the intro. I thought the animals were cute. Just a good reminder of what we're protecting on the Lachiep. So I just wanted to make this video because there's a lot that has been happening in regards to the Prince Rupert gas transmission project. And I guess just to start off, I want to say that I'm not going to be sharing much opinion. This is just going to be sharing what is available in the public domain because we have some meetings that are happening, one that's happening tomorrow. Let's see. Yeah, PRGT pipeline, Gitxsan, Wilt member open house. All Gitxsan welcome. The Gitxsan Development Corporation, on behalf of the Gitxsan Hereditary Chiefs, are hosting an information session for Gitxsan Wilt members. Come and learn about the project, the history, speak with experts, and how you can get involved. Soup, sandwiches, and refreshments. So that's Tuesday, tomorrow, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. here in Anspajach at Kispiox Community Hall. And yeah, I just wanted to share some baseline information for folks before we get into that meeting, because I think a lot of people still have questions where we're at as Gitxsan people. What's going on with this project? You know, a lot of us thought it was dead for quite a few years, and then all of a sudden it just came back. So let's take a look at our position in respect to the Prince Rupert gas transmission. So, first of all, I just want to talk about the right-of-way. So this would be a 500-meter right-of-way on Gitxsan territory. So that would be the width of it. And I'm going to be looking at this map that was created by the Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition. They have a pretty handy site that has some resources. And otherwise, it's almost impossible to find the data that I needed to talk about it. So I appreciate the work that they've been doing. So this is the right-of-way. This red border here is the Gitxsan territory. Purple is the right-of-way. You have pipe or stream crossings, I think, indicated by all these little blue dots. But we'll just jump right into the meat of it. So it enters Gitxsan territory in the east in the Susquehanna. And so that basically would be, it enters in the territory we know as Madili. I think for many years, you know, we've all been aware of the camp that was set up specifically to blockade this on that territory. And I guess just another disclaimer as well. This map, rather than using the territory names, it'll use the names of, I guess, the signatory chiefs, so to speak. And then I think it's also based on the map that was derived from the Delgamuch court case, which I think any Gitxsan knows there's, you know, always room for improvement along those lines, because, you know, from my understanding, what I've heard from folks who worked on that court case, by the time it got to the courts, only the external boundaries were basically agreed upon, and, you know, many of the internal boundaries were simply, I guess, established out of necessity for the sake of pushing the arguments in the courts, and they were never fully finalized. And so, you know, take any of this with a grain of salt, especially if, you know, I'll just be referring to these boundaries for the sake of this video, and where the pipeline is going, but, you know, by no means am I saying any of this is definitive, and that is entirely up to the respective WILPs. So it'll enter here, you know, through this territory, in this case, Lukadziwus, through the Susquehanna, up through Yakasip, Lachiep, a little stretch here, and that is going in behind 9 Mile Mountain. So through Susquehanna, behind 9 Mile, then it'll be going up through Gukunuks on the map. This territory, which is east of this of the Xian, so following roughly Salmon River Road, And then after it will cross the Gitxsan, the Skina, onto Delgamuch territory. And so that's starting to get into the Kispiox Valley. And it will go up north through Chliam Lacha territory, inches on, which on the map is Elas, a little stretch of territory here. And then it follows up along the Gitxsan, the Skina, for a good little ways. But then it starts to angle west towards the Kispiox, the Gitxsan Spayach River. And so then after leaving Chliam Lacha territory, that goes through Guyeh territory, and then once again through Delgamuch territory, shooting directly westwards, and then through a strip of Wimugul's territory, and then Gitludach territory. So essentially this pipeline would cross the Kispiox River just north of Bear Claw Lodge. That'll be a reference point for folks. And then after crossing Gitludach, Lachip, then it will cross through the Lachip of Qeil. And then after that, it moves into the Gitniau territories, which unfortunately aren't included in this map, but I think this large gap that you see in the Gitxsan territory map, this is largely composed of the Gitniau territories where this pipeline will start to move through. And I think many of these territories in this area, especially through this Nass watershed, are have been claimed by the Nisqa to a certain extent, so there's been a bit of a conflict and an overlap there, but that's something perhaps I'll let folks from Gitniau speak to. So that is roughly the right-of-way, and this would be by far the largest project to impact Gitxsan Lachip. But I guess just something else important to point out when you're looking at this map, if you look it up yourself, you see all these brown areas. So if you look down on the legend here, these are forestry. So the lighter ones are harvested cut blocks, so those are ones that have already been harvested, and the bigger ones are permitted cut blocks. So you could see that we already have quite a few cumulative impacts to our Lachip, that there's hardly anywhere in this valley that has not been impacted by rampant clear-cut operations. But I think that's something that we'll have to consider in the future. I'll be sharing more of my opinions at a later date. But I think it's just important to be aware that we have had a lot of industrial development, and we'll get into the ecological and economic implications of all that at another time. So now I want to look at this document that came out of a meeting regarding the PRGT May 13th, and this was produced by the Nisqa and their partners at Western LNG, which is a Texas-based corporation. So basically, in the first half of this year, TC Energy entered into an agreement to sell the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission to Western LNG and Nisqa Nation, essentially resurrecting it from what many of us had thought was essentially the death of the project, because all of its environmental assessment certificates were going to expire this year. There hadn't been any movement on, I guess, what would be a substantial start, and essentially we just thought it would all expire. And I think that was the majority sentiment of most Gitxsan that I've spoken to over the past several years. But now the Nisqa have basically proposed to amend the terminus of the project to now go across from Gingolch, and have changed the route from its original intended plan, which would be to go down to Prince Rupert, and specifically, I think Leilu Island, where there was quite a bit of conflict over this project, and there was resistance camp set up on Nakhula to stop this project because it posed a significant risk to our salmon and the transitional area where the salmon, as soon as they come out of the Gitxsan, reside in the eelgrass before, I guess, the adaptation to the saltwater, and then they do their multi-year journey before returning. But so that whole part of the route was scrapped in the Niska proposal. They want to bring it to their own terminal, which is the Gitxsan Sims terminal. And yeah, and it's specifically on this section of their new proposed right-of-way, which I haven't seen anything in regards to the permitting and the amendments necessary for that yet. But it's here that they want to do the early construction work, which I guess would be a strategic move to basically prove that they've substantially started the Prince Rupert gas transmission project, and thus locking in their permits for the entirety of the right-of-way, which, as far as I can tell, would make it indefinite. And I think something else to note in regards to the environmental assessment certificate is that the original certificate was issued in regards to the PRGT by the Environmental Assessment Office in 2014, and since that time there has been a new Environmental Assessment Act that was passed, which I think would have a lot more stringent environmental requirements, and now there's the inclusion of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and a few more components of it that I think would ultimately benefit the Gitxsan side when it comes to strategic negotiation. So, essentially that, the old environmental assessment process would be locked in place if it is determined that the Niska achieve a substantial start. So, there's some more in the timeline, but I think at the heart of it, I just want to get into where we're at as Gitxsan people in respect to this project. So, let's look at the agreement, the original agreement that was made in, I think, many of the signatures on it in 2014, but you'll see that there's signatures that range through 2015 and 2016, so it was clearly a work in progress. But this is the agreement that was signed between the Gitxsan chiefs, so you'll see down below, and the province in respect to the Prince Rupert gas transmission project. So I'll share this document in the comments. I'll be uploading this video on Facebook, and there's just a few interesting things that I want to point out in the meantime, because I think a lot of people, a lot of Wilpsters and Gitxsan are really curious where we stand in this whole situation. So I think one of the interesting things right off the bat is additional Huilp. This definition within this agreement means Gitxsan Nation Wilp or Huilp in addition to the represented Huilp that are identified on the signature page and whose Gitxsan hereditary chief signs this agreement on or before June 30th, 2015. So this would be the Wilp in addition to the represented Huilp, which are essentially the signatories on this paper. And this could mean every other Gitxsan Wilp. This could mean a whole lot of things. It's not entirely clear to me. If someone has any opinions or comments on, how this could be interpreted, please share it in the comments, because I think this is all work in progress, just trying to figure out our current situation. But I think that's very interesting. Alongside, Gitxsan Nation means the collective of Aboriginal peoples entitled to exercise Aboriginal rights recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitution Act. So let's take both those definitions and look at... here's represented Huwelp, meaning specifically Delgumuch, Gael, Gitludach, Guchgunux, Guye, Gedem Raldo, Claim Lacha, Lukitzius, Maus, We Elast, We Mugel, Yachasip, and Wasam Lacha. So, take those definitions and let's look at the section on let's see, where is it? Representations. So, representations and warranties. So Gitxsan hereditary chiefs representations. Gitxsan hereditary chiefs each represent and warrant to the province with the intent and understanding that they will be relied on by the province in entering this agreement, that he or she has the legal power, capacity, and authority to enter into this agreement on its own behalf and on behalf of the members of his or her representative who will, or additional who will. So that's interesting. Within the context of this agreement, Samoyed, a signatory Samoyed, would be recognized by the province as having the authority to enter into the agreement on behalf of additional who will. He or she has taken all necessary actions and has obtained all necessary approvals to enter into this agreement for and on behalf of the members of his or her represented who will, or additional who will. So this seems like a provision that's included to cover all the bases for the non-signatory houses. And basically what this says is that the signatory chiefs have obtained the consent of their houses through some form of due process, as well as the consent and approval of additional who will, which is defined above. And you can review all this, but this agreement is valid and binding obligation upon Gitxsan. So while it doesn't have Gitxsan explicitly defined up above, you'll see that they refer to Gitxsan Nation as the collective of Aboriginal peoples, which I guess would define all Gitxsan. And I think this leads to a bigger discussion around what does it truly mean to ratify a decision within a WILP, and at a larger scale, given that this is the biggest project to ever be introduced to Gitxsan territory, what does it mean for a project to be ratified for all who will, which I think in this falls under additional WILP. So you could see, the signature by the minister. This is published on the BC government website. You can find it even just by Googling Gitxsan agreements, and you'll find basically every agreement that exists between the Crown and various Gitxsan Huil or chiefs. And you'll see the signatures that are on here. There are many spots that haven't been filled, but you'll see generally that this has been signed by the defined represented will up above. So this is an interesting document that I think we will look at alongside another document. Let's see if I have it queued up here. So this is the Amdim Trust, and this was a document that was, I think, leaked publicly. It's been in the public domain since around 2016, but this just talks about some of the internal governance on the Gitxsan side of these agreements. And so from what I can tell, this agreement was created to, or this trust was created to house the funds that were derived from the two agreements that would have been made with the proponent directly, the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission, as well as the funds that would be allocated under the payment schedule included in this provincial agreement, which I'll just point out real quickly. Okay, ongoing benefits agreement. So that's all defined in there. And then I think here, financial benefits. So this basically outlines the payments that would be received by the Gitxsan Development Corporation on behalf of and for the benefit of the Gitxsan Nation. And this one refers to $5,810,000 for the natural gas pipeline project, which would follow the schedule of 2 installments. An initial payment will be provided basically as soon as the province receives written confirmation from the proponent that orders have been placed for substantially all of the pipe required for the project, that a contract has been entered with at least one large diameter pipeline general contractor, and the completion of production welding along a portion of at least 10 kilometers. And then there'll be the second payment, which begins after an in-service date of the natural gas pipeline. So as far as I can tell, these two criteria have not been met, so the province probably has not released the, I guess, what would be either of the halves of this 5.8 million. And then there is also the additional payment will be provided to Gitxsan Development Corporation on behalf of and for the benefit of Gitxsan Nation. Additional payment of $1,162,000 would be made as soon as practicable after the effective date, which is referring to this agreement. So there is a bonus for signing this agreement. So that was $1 million from the province, which would have likely gone through in 2016 or around that time. So getting back to the MDM Trust, you have a total of $5,329,000 that, through this internal document of the Gitxsan Development Corporation was being allocated on behalf of the represented Huilp. It's the same language used in the agreements. And then you also have this other definition of impacted Huilp. So it's the represented Huilp who sign on behalf of the Gitxsan according to that previous agreement. But then you have the impacted Huilp, which is another criteria of people whose right-of-ways, who the right-of-way directly impacts their territory. So you see there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. According to here, about 10 chiefs and their lachip that are impacted by the right-of-way. And then, I guess interestingly enough, you'll have a few chiefs who do not have a direct right-of-way on their territory, but are also included to a smaller extent in this trust with the $40,000 allocations. And I guess the one thing within this document that points to that this is related to the PRGT agreement is this section here talking about how the funding, I guess the funds, allocations, and distributions intended for Gukwinuks will be held in trust, and in this case that would be with the GDC until such time as has been delivered the signed agreement approval to the administrative trustee or payments contemplated by section 6.8 of the PRGT agreement are made. And I guess that's one agreement that I think anyone who was not directly a part of those discussions would not have access to. Whoa, the green screen's bleeding through my face here. But let's see if I can fix that real quick. No, that kind of made it worse. Okay. Whatever. We'll just tolerate that. That's not important. So, yeah, you'll see the funds that are being held by the Amdimch Trust, and this is an agreement that was signed in 2016 on behalf of the trustees that are defined in these documents. I'll share this for folks to look at and to analyze, but basically, yeah, this is just a piece of, where we're at in terms of this pipeline, the funding, all that jazz. And, I think this would be the grounds for, some questions that we may have going into this meeting on Tuesday, going into future meetings, more of which I'll host. I'm tentatively hoping to do one on the 31st here in Kispiox, but I have to check the schedule at the band office in terms of renting the hall. And yeah, I think those are just some pieces of the puzzle. And, I think there's big discussions we need to have in regards to governance. There's big discussions we need to have in regards to consent. And yeah, I'm really curious to hear what the GDC has to share after all this time. I'm really hoping we do have some heart-to-heart discussions. And I know a lot of people are concerned about this project, especially because of the scale of it, because of the cumulative environmental impacts that we already have through our Lachip, and also because of what has happened on the Wet'suwet'en territory, where we're really seeing, I guess, the outcome of a project like this, especially in regards to the impacts it has had to community, to families, to interwilp relations. And yeah, and especially seeing, once the jobs move on, what the fallout of all that is like, because, the economic aspect of these projects is relatively short-lived. So I guess one last thing I want to touch on is, I want to do a video in the future just quickly talking about the court case for Zahel, who was basically sentenced the other week for enacting Wet'suwet'en laws of trespass. And I was fortunate to sit in on one of those sentencing hearings, and yeah, I think it has a lot of implications, especially given that, it's certain that there's multiple points of resistance that I'm aware of in regards to this PRGT pipeline on Gitxsan territory. And I think we really need to look at some of the precedents that have been set by the courts through injunctions, through the, I guess, strategies and priorities of the pipeline corporations, their lawyers, and the Crown in how they've decided to tackle the issue of conflicting Indigenous law and Crown jurisdiction. So, but I think another thing about this, here's a great article that's published on Dogwood, written by Kai Nagata. And I think an interesting thing in regards to this is you had a lot of Gitxsan that showed up to support the Wet'suwet'en over and over and over. And here you had many of the signatories on this day actually show up in Smithers to support the Wet'suwet'en chiefs, especially in their conflict right now in dealing with these contempt of a court order charges. But here's a quote by one of the signatories of the agreements that I shared, Gordon Sebastian, where he says, "We will talk about it amongst ourselves, and if there's good reason, we will probably just stop it," referring to the PRGT pipeline. "It's not a matter of getting out of the agreement or not. It's just a matter of saying no pipeline." So, that was interesting because that was only just this year, and I think because of the Gitxsan support for the Wet'suwet'en, because of what we've seen with TC Energy's other project, Coastal GasLink, I think there's been 8 years for the Gitxsan signatories of these original agreements to reconsider whether or not a pipeline on Gitxsan territory is a good idea. And I think a lot of us right now are just waiting to hear what the position is right now of the signatory chiefs, especially when a lot of our will under this agreement would seemingly fall under the criteria of additional who will, even if we have not been a part of any of these discussions at any point and are not even aware of what the general position of the represented who will under these agreements are. So I think that's one of the questions I want to bring is, where do you stand as the signatories right now? Do we oppose this project? Do you support it? Everything I've seen about this basically just says, come learn about the project, the history, speak with experts, and how you can get involved. And it's an information session, which I think is interesting wording. So I'm really hoping we have an opportunity here to sit down with various Simgiget and basically get a baseline of where we're at, because a lot of these discussions happen behind closed doors. A lot of this is basically, as you've seen, me trying to scrounge up different pieces of information online through social media on government websites just to try to get an idea of where we're at. So I appreciate everyone who stuck around and listened to the video this long. I just wanted to share those thoughts, and I've saved a lot of my opinions, my position on this matter in general. You could probably figure out where I stand on it, but I just wanted to share some of the publicly available documents that might elucidate where we're at legally in terms of our positioning with the Crown and our positioning with these corporations and what type of agreements we're looking at. And, one thing, I might want to say, especially, if agreements were made on behalf of the impacted WILP, on behalf of the represented WILP, and on behalf of the additional WILP, then, I think, I would argue that the additional WILP should have a right to at least review the agreements that were signed that have not been made public, and especially the most important agreement, which is the one that would be directly with Prince Rupert Gas Transmission, not the agreement with the province that we all have access to, but there's the highly confidential agreement with PRGT that I think for any of us to figure out where we stand in all this, we do need to see that document. But yeah, for sure, I think, Tuesday's an opportunity to learn a bit more and, to ask some questions, to get involved, as they say. And yeah, stay tuned for in the future. We'll have, some more videos talking about, I guess, some of the legal considerations of Crown conflict with indigenous law based on some cases that involve Wet'suwet'en law, that involve contempt of court orders, and that involve enforcing the laws of trespass on your lachie. So thank you very much. Doyach sinism, everyone. I hope this has at least been, helpful. I'm just sharing what's public. I'm, at this point, really not trying to step on any toes or do anything crazy, but I think it's really important that Gitxsan people at least review the documents that we do have access to and get a baseline understanding of our current position, because I know there are many, many folks who have been trying to get a handle on this, and it has not been the easiest thing to figure out what has been going on, especially when many of the signatories of these original agreements have passed at this point, and we don't really have too many mechanisms to understand what has happened with the funds and the trusts, what has happened in the meantime with these agreements. Best case scenario, they've been gathering 5% interest each year for 8 years, and if the Gitxsan decide to break these agreements, then you could pay it back and keep the interest on top. Who knows? Those are all questions we can ask and should ask, in respect to our positions of our respective will. Like, I'm not gonna tell anyone what to do on anyone else's territory, but these are considerations that I've had, especially given the potential social, economic, and environmental impacts that would result from a major industry moving through my own lachie, which is definitely concerning, especially since we have not had any involvement in the process until this point. And so I'm hoping that this is just more than an information session. I'm hoping that we do have a chance to really sit down together as Gitxsan, because Gitxsan Wilt member open house, to have some heart to heart, share our baseline positions, and if, like Gordon said here, it's not a matter of getting out of the agreement or not, it's just a matter of saying no pipeline. Let's see if that's a choice, because yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So anyway, come to this meeting, check it out, and then we'll be having our own grassroots community meeting in the future that I'll send notice of in short order, and we'll also have more videos coming out that talk about Sahil's specific court case. Yeah, so that's it for the first dialogue of Lachie defense, or Lachie def. This will get thrown on YouTube, this will get thrown on my Facebook. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. That's all fair. I'm just a young Gitxsan person trying to figure out what's going on with the current Huelp. And, and I think just like any other Gitxsan, it's a system I believe in. It's a system that I want to see succeed. And I think it only benefits everyone that more people become empowered and educated in all these aspects of Huelp, Crown, industry relations, and within the processes of Huelp governance, and especially these precedents that are being set when it comes to decision making within our Huelp system. That's up to every respective Huelp to decide for themselves. I know how we as Gitlutum Hetwit Huelp Tsibasa, how we make our decisions, but I think just on the big scale, when we're functioning internationally, when we have agreements that outline Gitxsan as the entire collective, and when we have additional Huelp as catch-all for Huelp that are not involved in these agreements. I think, there are questions to be raised there, when it comes to respecting the autonomy of each respective will in decision making. So, yeah, I feel like that's about a good place to conclude this video. Thank you all very much. I'll post the documents, and I think the real discussion will happen below in the Facebook comments, or wherever this ends up. It'll probably be on YouTube, what have you. But yeah, thank you very much, and samach.